Hi, everybody. Great to see you all again. Um, so, tonight is one of my other favorite topics, and this is a conversation that's really, really important to the planning work that community development does. It also really highlights the partnerships we have with special districts and agencies. Um, and it also really comes into play, these relationships do when we review applications that also um, are the development proposals that many of you participate in as a community and as private citizens and landowners. So tonight, what we're really talking about is we're talking about two goal elements that go hand in hand. So one, goal 11 talks about public facilities, and the second goal, goal 14, talks about urbanization, which what that translates to for all of us is what happens in our unincorporated communities. And so in order to have a thriving unincorporated community that can allow or encourage various levels and types of development, you have to have public facilities to support that type of development because we all need public services to live within our community, and we rely heavily on those services. So goal 11, what it really does is it requires us to provide for timely, orderly, and efficient arrangement of public facilities and services. And so some of the easy ones to identify would be water and sewer, energy. So we have representatives from the Nescalin Regional Sanitary District and the Water District. We have Mr. Olson here from Tillamook PUD. But other services include fire protection. They include police services. We talk about schools because we have to have schools for our children, right? So that's a public facility and service. Health, hospitals, clinics, environmental health. And so others include communication services, telephone. Now we have a lot of conversation about things like cell towers. And one of the other recent conversations that we've had as our communities continue to modernize and our needs change and technology continues to evolve are things like fiber optic cables, which was a big one. And so what we want to make sure is that as our communities to continue to grow, do we have adequate public services and facilities? It's a really important question. In the relationship with goal 14, so goal 14 talks about urbanization. So there are places where urbanization is allowed, and there are places where urbanization is not. And there's a lot of components for public services and facilities that help identify urban areas. There's also areas where certain public facilities are allowed and areas where they are not, primarily sewer. So areas where sewer can be located because it is an urbanized service include our cities and UGBs, and then our unincorporated communities with established community growth boundaries. So Nescalin has an established community boundary. Those properties, though, do not include several areas of the Nescalin community as a whole, particularly I'll use Slab Creek Road. So urbanization allows sewer in Nescalin as defined by that community boundary. But because that is an urbanized service, it is not allowed outside of that boundary. And that's often something that we hear a lot of. There's also been areas within Nescalin, as we've discussed before, that have had to have either some sort of hybrid of on-site sanitation improvements or areas like Viking Estates, where that sewer service is not available But because going back to goal 11, we need to make sure that public facilities and services exist. The alternative to that sewer line is an on-site sanitation system or wastewater treatment system for an individual system for a lot. The community plans for Nescalin and other unincorporated communities are also contained within the Goal 14 element, which is the urbanization element. And in that element, it identifies and defines what those qualifiers are that actually allow a community to be urbanized. There's a lot of discussion in there about what areas are built and committed. So that's a huge qualifier for being able to meet the test by state definition to be an unincorporated community and have access to urban services. And communities like Nescalin, who were developed and existed prior to the creation of the land use plan and program for Tillamook County, the state recognized that zoning your community something like rural residential was not appropriate because it was built and committed and those urban services existed. Communities that did not meet that test would be something like Tierra del Mar, which is why even though we recognize them as a community and they are very much a community with their own community identity, they don't have sewer or other urban amenities because they didn't meet the definition of an urbanized community. And so really what Goal 14 does is it walks you through those areas within the county that were built and committed, that qualified as an urban area to receive that unincorporated community status with a defined community boundary. And then there were other areas that we identify more of as rural service areas or rural areas that are also built and committed to where they could be zoned rural residential and did not revert back to something like farm or forest zones. Where these two goal elements in these services become highlighted through project review is in the conditional use process and also when we look at ordinance amendments or zone changes. And so specifically, if you think about in your community zoning, there are always a list of uses that may be allowed, and they're listed under uses permitted conditionally. And part of the criteria that is the test to determine whether or not that use should be allowed is a discussion about, one, consistency with the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. That includes goal elements 11 and 14. Then more specifically, criterion number 6 of the conditional use review requires an analysis of the adequacy of public utilities and facilities to make sure before we consider approving a development that's listed conditionally in a zone, that we know that there are adequate public services and facilities to serve that development. Another one that includes is transportation, so that's our roads. So when an applicant has to apply for consideration of a use that's permitted conditionally, part of their justification is to provide us with the service provider letters. So oftentimes that's where they're required to go to the water and sewer districts and provide a letter of availability to confirm that the proposed development is appropriate for the area and those services are available. There are times we require input from Tillamook People's Utility District. The fire chief is always a partner in most of the development that we review for the reason of making sure that the public services of fire protection are present for development. And when a property is outside of a fire district, it actually reverts back to Fire Patrol through the state of Oregon, the Department of Forestry, and we visit with them. Another partner that we regularly work with is Tillamook County Public Works, or ODOT, the Oregon Department of Transportation, because making sure that adequate access is present, but that also the roads can serve the proposed development is another critical piece of that review. And that's another critical piece for demonstration that those conditional use criterion can be met. The sheriff's office can sometimes become part of those conversations as well, depending on what type of development is proposed. Where we rely heavily on all of these entities as well is if someone is looking at a zone change, because oftentimes with a zone change, it changes what type of development can occur, and oftentimes the level of development that can occur within an area or on a property. And so again, making sure through that analysis of review of the comprehensive plan for what the goals and priorities are and where these services are allowed, as well as making sure from these providers that there's adequate public services available. We rely on the folks that are part of your panel this evening quite heavily to make sure that when we're looking at a proposal, that they've confirmed that they have what they need to make sure that the use can be accommodated, and also that the level of service will not be impacted to the community as a whole. So I hope that's kind of a higher level, but hits most of the points. So Brenda, would you like me to take any quick questions before we dive into our panelists?
Yeah, I think maybe that's appropriate. Just take not more than two, just because we have a lot of panelists. But if there's two burning, and because we can also ask people to refer to well, more Q&A at the end. Mm-hmm. So let's see if we can. Did any questions pop up in the chat? Are there any questions?
No. Okay. That means I either did a good enough job or I lost everybody. I'm not sure. But we can come back later, right?
Yes, I think it was great, very clear. And I'm anxious to hear our our panelists, because we do have a lot of them. We do. So why don't we start with the first group? I'll let you introduce, and we'll move through there. And there is plenty of time for Q&A later. Just if you have any questions, please write them in the chat. Thank you. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Brenda. So it is my pleasure to introduce Troy Truth, who is the General Manager of the Nescalin Regional Water District. So thank you for joining us, Troy.
Hi, everybody. We're zooming back in frame. What we got here? Even farther. I'm the one in the blue shirt that waves his hand.
Looks good.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm here to talk about the way the water district fits in with these goals. And I was going to break it into two separate things. Our source for our water, which is important, how much water we can produce, which is important to how much of the community we can deliver water to. So currently, our only source of water for the Nescalin Regional Water District is Hawk Creek. We have a treatment plant. The Frank E. Clanton plant is located on Hawk Creek, where the valley narrows on the basically east of Nescalin, without getting too specific, so we avoid people driving up and saying hi. So we have Hawk Creek as our primary water source. We have water rights to our Hawk Creek water treatment plant that equal 1.65 cubic feet per second off of Hawk Creek, which is approximately 740 gallons per minute. Our current capacity for filtering water from Hawk Creek is 380 gallons per minute. So in theory, we can't filter water faster than we're legally allowed to pull water off of the creek, which is probably a good thing. We are limited to the amount of water we can pull off of Hawk Creek during times of drought. Our lowest reading ever in the creek is 2.72 cubic feet per second. The water district has to begin curtailment of water with any kind of flow measurements less than a cubic feet per second, because the state of Oregon makes us at least attempt to keep 1 cubic foot per second of water in the stream for the fish and wildlife that exist in the stream. You know, sucking a stream dry is not a good plan. So we have ever had to curtail water, not saying that it couldn't happen in the future sometime, but we've never had to. But to put some sort of perspective on it, the largest demand that we've ever had for water was 240 gallons per minute on the 4th and 5th of July of 2019, which is well within our ability to produce. And basically, that's our water source in a nutshell. There's a lot more information on our website about our watershed, what we have and what we don't. See, I see a question. Any plans to protect our water quality by securing some of the privately owned land in the watershed? Yes. We're constantly working to acquire the property in the watershed, which is, for a lot of places, a pretty rare opportunity. You're never going to acquire the watershed for like a large city, really, in the Willamette Valley, because the watershed is just giant. So Nescalin, it is actually feasibly possible that we could acquire the watershed, and we've been working to do so for years. And we'll continue to do so at any given opportunity. Let's see, that's good. Now, to talk about our goals that are affected by 11 and 14, what Sarah was talking about. We have a capital improvement plan that was finished in 2015, and that lines out very detailed on projects that are needed to expand availability of water throughout the community, make the water system more robust, make water quality better. Now, also on our webpage, we have documents pertaining to our capital improvement plan, what our projected costs are, some goals in the next 5 years, there's some goals in the next 20. So I have written down several things that we're doing in the future as far as making the water system more robust so that it can handle more customers. So on our 5-year horizon, what we're shooting to do is we have a project for backup power at the Hawk Hills Pump Station. It is the only place in the water district that actually runs out of water pressure during a power outage, which we all know kind of happens. So that's number 1 on our list. Number 2, modernizing our water meter infrastructure. New radio read meters were more accurate. They allow us to read more meters quicker and keep our eye on leaks and different things that happen in our customers' homes, because we can actually just drive by now and they will tell us the meters. So we're also investing in the next 3 items I have on my list are mixers for our reservoirs. That's to improve water quality. pretty much an industry standard now to install mixers in reservoirs. We have several reservoirs that don't have mixers in them. So we, during warm weather or not a lot of use in our water system, we have water that doesn't get mixed properly in the reservoirs. So these mixers would solve that problem. And that helps the entire community with just better water quality all the way around. System telemetry is one of the things on my list for the next 5 years. We have 2 projects of installing pipe for the next 5 years, both of which would occur in the South Beach area. And they both involve fixing undersized infrastructure that moves water around the South Beach subdivision and therefore into town, the core area of Nescalin. So all in all, that's the water district's 5-year goal as far as projects are concerned. And that list is, it can change depending upon the situation on the ground. These things aren't really set in stone until they are being done. I think that's a good way to put it. Because something might present itself in a different manner that might make us put one or another project farther up on our list. Sorry, I'm reading comments. It's hard to see. Okay. Does the capacity of the water system work for population projections over the next 20 years? Easy answer, yes. Our projections, if they remain accurate, and who knows if it remains accurate, but they were done in our 2015 capital improvement plan, would call for roughly 25% increase in population during that time frame. And we have more than enough capacity to satisfy that within reasonable expectations. Okay, next one. The reason 20 years is significant is that is the typical duration of our community plan. Okay, yeah. What about earthquake valves on the reservoirs? It is an identified plan, and you know, if we can get to it, we can get to it. And once again, we already got to one because we were doing a project that involved the infrastructure that led to the reservoir. So we installed the earthquake valve, which, just to explain to everybody, what it does is it shuts the water off if the ground starts to shake. That will keep, in theory, keep the water in the reservoir, and hopefully, well, not hopefully, if it stays in the water reservoir, we'll be able to distribute the water to anybody in an emergency. And as far as the other mixers go, we have them planned along with the projects that address deficiencies in the reservoirs that we need these earthquake valves on. So this will be done probably sometime in the next 5 years, but kind of hard to tell timing wise. It's whenever we do the project that does the infrastructure involving these reservoirs where we need earthquake valves. So we do have one, and we have plans on more. If that answers that question.
Thank you, Troy. So perhaps we could take a pause here and keep moving through our panelists, and then we can track any additional questions for the water district as they come up. Does that sound okay? Awesome.
Sounds good.
Thank you. All right, so I did not see Chief Ader in the meeting. Chief, if you are here, would you please unmute yourself? Okay, well, I'll tell you, I'll keep looking for him, and we can always come back to him if he's able to join us later. So next, I'd like to introduce everyone, in case you have not met Sheriff Brown, Tillamook County Sheriff Josh Brown. So thank you, Sheriff, for joining us. You could please unmute yourself. We'd love to hear more about the importance of emergency services as those planned services and facilities in Tillamook County.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, nice to meet everybody. I know there's a lot of people I haven't officially met. I definitely have met Sarah numerous times already. Been great to work with. You know, I can't really speak about the urban growth and all that kind of stuff. That's just not really my specialty. You know, overall, the sheriff's office is obviously prides ourselves very much on working as hard as we can for the community. You know, Nescalin is obviously at the very far south end. I, as recently as December, was working as just a regular standard night shift patrol deputy, and I was primarily, almost exclusively, a South County deputy. And I would try to get down to Nescalin and do a drive-through at least once a shift. That didn't always happen, but that was certainly the goal, and certainly something that the sheriff's office does take very seriously, that is an area that we try to cover. We obviously don't have very many calls generated from there. We do have calls generated from there, but that does not negate the fact that we need to come through and you know, let the neighborhood see us and be able to visit with people. We are running at fairly critically low numbers of staff members right now, coming into the most busiest time. There's a lot of reasons for that, and one of them is just simply that every business that's looking to hire people are struggling. So there's just the in general struggle of trying to find employees, and then you top all of that off with all of the legislation that's going on that is calling for police reform, etc., from the extreme all the way down to the reasonable. And then there's definitely a huge movement for defunding police. Tillamook County is phenomenal as far as their support for local law enforcement. I was proven that every single time I would work a shift. I would have no less than a half a dozen people, all the way up to 15 different people, tell me to be safe, have a good night, thank me for being there. Tillamook County is amazing for that, and that's not an exaggeration. So we're kind of in an isolated little bubble of really good community support, which is wonderful to have, especially when everything you see on the news is you know, talking badly about police. So we have very good people that work here that do have a lot of pride in what they do and who they work for. So we're continuing to recruit people and find those quality employees, and continuing to provide the best possible service that we can, trying to get everybody to understand that we are running low. So, well, look at that. Looks like I got some questions, or at least one. The nature of calls for your areas, or for Nescalin specifically. So, and Jim Ader could probably speak to a lot of this, but we do get water rescues down there. We have had calls. A lot of people do like to go to the beach when they're feeling, when they're in mental crisis and they're feeling like they want to harm themselves. So we do respond to that to try to help out with that. I have responded to a very small handful of domestic type disturbances. I have arrested people out of there. We have had the occasional noise complaint, fireworks complaints, things like that. But you know, the calls in general are fairly limited down there. You know, we do get the occasional calls going up like Slab Creek, which I realize may not be Nescalin proper, but it's certainly what we would consider that area. But that would be the generalized kind of call volume that we get. Hope that answers your question, Chris. But yeah, so that's, you know, unless there's any other questions, that's about all I have.
Thank you, Sheriff Brown, and thank you for all you do for our communities. Again, you know, it's really important, especially, you know, there's a lot of development proposals in communities where the development requires that conditional use analysis and further discussion and consideration of the presence and adequacy of public services and facilities to serve that area in relation to what new development may be introduced or when we're looking at a zone change. There's many times, like if we're looking at a duplex or other types of uses permitted conditionally, perhaps the sheriff's office will not be as present in that review process. But one thing that is important is when we look at our commitment to goal 11 is to make sure that we do have adequate public emergency response personnel, including police, to help keep our community safe or to call and be available in those moments of crisis. And so, you know, we've talked, especially with the water district already, about population projections and what that means, and can the water district continue to serve that increased population that we know we're going to experience over the next 20 years. The same would be true for the sheriff's office, and that's certainly something I know Sheriff Brown, you know, has looked at and continues to look at as he continues to help lead us in that direction for our communities. So thank you, Sheriff. And Sheriff Brown, there may be some more questions for you later too as we continue to go through. So hopefully you'll be able to stay on our meeting for our town hall for a little bit.
I'm going to attempt to stay on. I snuck home and got a sandwich, so you know, I'm able to stay on. I may be popping in and out just as I kind of take care of some stuff while the office is quiet, but I'm going to leave this up and be involved in this as much as I can. So I don't know how much I'll have to offer beyond kind of what we talked about, but I'm certainly want to be there for questions and stuff. So
thank you very much. Enjoy your sandwich. So next on our list is Chris Lady. Chris Lady is the director of the Tillamook County Public Works Department. He's also the county's engineer. So Chris and I do a tremendous amount of work together. Pretty much anything that I look at, I'm dragging Chris along to look at those projects with me, because transportation facilities is such a critical component of development review. And so it's my pleasure not only to work with Chris, but to introduce Chris this evening so he can talk more about how his job and his department's role plays into goals 11 and 14. So thank you, Chris. Welcome.
I think I may owe you a lunch now. So Public Works comprises of the road department and solid waste. So when I say Public Works, it's used interchangeably with the road department. Just a quick overview, road department manages 324 miles worth of road from Falcon Cove, which is immediately adjacent to Oswald West, down to Cascade Head. So you actually have to leave Tillamook, go into Lincoln County, and then back up. We also manage another 41 miles worth of local access roads. So altogether, 365 miles worth of roads. Included in that is another one bridge per every 3 miles. So a lot of bridges. With that, some of our major issues are the bridges and storms. So actually on Monday, you'll start to see a construction crew mobilize into Nescalin to begin the construction of the Nescalin emergency egress route. So right off the get-go, they need to move to the site and then prepare the site for construction. So you'll start seeing some of that happen early next week. The storm events are a big part of Tillamook County. 2015 storm event. We still have 3 more bridges that will be constructed due to that project or that storm. Those will be in the summer of 2022, and 3 slide projects that will be constructed 2022 and 2023 if everything goes on track. So those large storm events really certainly impact us. We operate on a budget that has been declining over the years. We are currently operating at the same revenue source that we had back in 2006. So inflation adjusted, we've managed the roads at the same dollar amount as we did in 2006. So timber used to be 72% of our revenue. It's now 8%. So when you throw in the additional TLT revenue, which is 25%, it still doesn't come anywhere close to what timber was financing. So a big change. Tillamook is also unique in that we have a lot of second homes and rental businesses. Almost half of all the houses are either second homes or rental businesses. Public Works is funded by the State Motor Vehicle Fund as the primary funding source. All the gas tax, all the motor vehicle fees go to the state. The state then divvies it up. 30% of that goes to the county. The counties get money based on the number of registered vehicles that are in the county. So for a registered vehicle, you need to be a permanent resident. So when you take out half the housing stock and you have the housing stock that remains, those people that own registered vehicles, that is the money we get from the state, not the amount of vehicles that are on the road in Tillamook County. So we have a lot of challenges that we deal with out here. When it comes to long-term planning, we've been operating off of a bond for since I think 2013. This is the last summer of any significant spending of that bond. And then we need to go back out for a new bond. Outside of that bond, we struggle to even do the minimal maintenance, quite frankly. So looking at long-term planning, we'll continue to do paving operations as we can. Mowing operations will continue, and then culvert replacements will continue. The big projects they won't happen without a bond. As Sarah mentioned, her and I, we spend a fair amount of time anytime development comes up. So I look at it from two hats. One is a public works director, and the second is a county engineer. So I've been a professional engineer for the last 23 years, I suppose it is now. 19 years of that have been as a consultant, and then I transitioned over to here. When any development comes across our way, I review that for compliance with standards, applicable standards. I understand each location is unique. So subsequently, I try to look at things through that lens. I don't necessarily leave one size fits all. Certainly what would happen in the center of Tillamook may not be appropriate for a road at the back end of Blaine. They're just apples and oranges. But standards are standards. I do look at each one independently. First and foremost of everything I do is what happens with storm drain. Water is a big impact to Tillamook County, and certainly the last thing I want to do is see a development that would subsequently impact somebody downstream from there. So those are some of the things I specifically look at. Traffic, when we look at development, so traffic in Nescalin, the roads are already fairly skinny. There is no short-term or long-term plan to widen those roads. We work with developers. So in Tillamook proper, it's actually in the county, on a county road, we're working with the developer to improve that road to handle his additional traffic. And that is a cost share. Some of that we're using money from the private developer to try to get the biggest bang for the buck on the ground. So that's a very quick overview of public works and in particular Nescalin. And no questions for me, so I skated by on that one.
Oh, no, I got a question for you. Oh, there's two questions. So I'm going to ask mine first, Randall, if that's okay, just because I think this will help kind of tie things together a bit. So Chris, oftentimes when we're looking at development, you require a traffic impact analysis or a traffic impact study. And that study is specific to the proposed use. And that also ties back to our requirement to make sure there's adequate public utilities and facilities.
Right.
The second part of it is when we do look at development proposals, who is responsible for those road improvements if you determine they're necessary?
So we have one development in particular that is working its way through the motions. So we'll hit two topics. One, the traffic impact study. So if a development comes along that is going to produce more than a residential house, I mean, there's a limit there. say if I'm going to come in a development, I'm going to have 50 new homes out there. I want to know how does that traffic impact the road. So we would throw that onto the developer to prove to me what are the impacts, and this would be a professional engineer that would prepare that study. The Institute of Transportation Engineers has a lot of documents, and we use that as kind of the Bible, so to speak, of that. When we do see that there is an impact, whether or not it's based on traffic or it's based on load rating or loading. So one development that's sort of moving through the ranks is going to produce a lot of heavy truck traffic. So I will take that truck traffic and I will review the roads that are out there. What is the deterioration that those heavy trucks are going to put onto that road? And at that point, I would say condition of approval for this is that that developer, contractor, whatever it may be, needs to fund this work in order to mitigate the damage that that person will do. So we will look at that. The traffic is, what is it now? If we throw new traffic at it, what would it look like? Can the road infrastructure actually physically support road width, that amount of traffic? Does that traffic have an impact to emergency services? We work with Chief Ader a fair amount on a couple of projects and saying, you know, Chief, I've got a couple of concerns here. Are you comfortable with that? Or vice versa, Chief might have something and say, Chris, I'm not sure about this. Can we talk about that? So we don't operate in a vacuum. We are very much easy to work with. I've got no problem calling Sarah up and asking her questions, texting her, and whatnot. And Chief and I think we spoke at least once today concerning another development. So very good group of people to work with. That answer that question?
Thank you. Yes. And so then what you see is in the conditions of approval that will come from the land use review process, the requirements that Chris determines are necessary, or Chief Ader, the water, the sewer district, and others. Those are captured in those conditions of approval for those land use decisions to make sure that if a developer needs to provide a bond or something to make sure that road damage is repaired, either due to construction or the long-term use that's proposed, or you know what that traffic impact study may say that may require additional road improvement or could potentially actually limit the intensity of the use and development because it's determined that there's a threshold, you know, like multifamily housing or a new market or a new restaurant. You know, the size and the scale of the use could be limited based on what Chris determines is available for adequacy of public utilities and facilities, and Chief Ader as well. So Chris, there was one more question. Are special service districts for unincorporated areas a way to take any of the services you have a challenge to address? Gravel roads and other things you can think of might help if we fund them ourselves.
So there are two situations there when we look at those local districts. One is a road service district, and there is only one in Tillamook County, and that has been in place since at least the 60s. To the best of my knowledge, I've looked, I could not find any other road service districts that are out there. So you know which one I'm talking about, Sarah. The second thing outside of that is when we look at road districts is local improvement districts. And this is where a group of people would get together and they would, through the legal process and taxes, that the project would be constructed, reconstructing a road. It happens all the time in water districts, but roads not so much. So as a group of people, they would, through legal process, go through and say, yes, let's reconstruct the road. Public Works would manage that, and then Public Works would be reimbursed the dollar amount it took to pay that. The issue with that is that we've had probably 10 people ask me about that. One person becomes excited about that, and then it dies. It never goes anywhere. I would really love to see something like that get off the ground because I think it'd be a win for everybody. Local access roads are in particular difficult. So a local access road, and there are 41 miles of that within the county. Those are roads that they're public, but they are not maintained by the county, which subsequently means is that you go back into early 90s, late 80s, when we had a revenue that was almost twice as much as what we're operating under today. These are inflation adjusted numbers. Is that, and they had a staff that was more than double the amount of staff that we operate with today. Is they had an asphalt plant. They own their own gravel pits. They operated those. We don't do that now. But back then, you had a lot of people that in resources to do that. The county would take care of roads that were never theirs to take care of. When the money started tanking and we went from 72% timber revenue down, the county pulled back and says, we're no longer going to maintain these roads. They were never counties to begin with, but we've been maintaining it because we had the resources. So those local access roads essentially were in good shape and they have fallen apart. Roads are good for 20 years. They need that continual maintenance. When the maintenance stops, the roads fall apart. You've seen them everywhere throughout the county. The county could not and really can't today maintain the road network that we have. So you have all these local access roads, and people don't understand a local access roads is that they're public roads, they're dedicated to the public, but nobody maintains them. So it's the local residents that maintain them. Historically, the county would take care of that, or you have some of these tighter knit communities, they would take care of the road maintenance. What has happened is you've seen a generational change as some of the grandparents retire or pass on. The children or the grandchildren take ownership of that property, but they already have a house in Portland. So subsequently, that house is vacation rental business. So the local group that were maintaining the roads in the absence of the county are no longer there. So the roads, as they're declining, are plummeting now. So you're seeing that significant impact. I think I responded to 3 local access road requests today, and I know the commissioners are getting pounded by that. So when you look at those service districts, those would be great in a local access road. Each one is unique, each one is its own challenge, each one needs a champion. So it is possible to do that work, but it needs to have somebody manage that and get the thing off the ground. It is there is process through state law in order to do these things. What more frequently happens is that we will end up with a couple of people that want some help with that, and we will help to manage the work on local access road. The locals will come together, they'll get a quote from a contractor, they pay the contractor to do the work, and the county reviews the work before it gets started. The county will review the work during construction and basically agree with the homeowners that yes, the contractor did the work that they were intended to do. And but we don't hold the contract. We're not contractually obligated to it. We issue a permit to work within the right of way, and that is far more effective than going down the local improvement district. The local improvement district is a better way to go because that way you can guarantee that your neighbor is contributing to it. You'll have 15 people and 12 are on board, but 3 say absolutely not. And then subsequently, everybody is responsible to pay for those 3 people's share. Whereas local improvement district, you can require that through a tax, through their property tax, but which property tax does not contribute to the road operating fund. So all the property taxes are not part of the road fund, operating fund.
Thank you, Chris. So quickly before we move on to PUD, there was one more quick question. If you could take just a moment, please. Your oversight is limited only to public roads as info, and I think what they're trying to talk about is where would roads like South Beach Road and portions of Hot Creek that are private, where would they fall into this?
So Public Works only deals with public roads. If a private developer were to create a new subdivision, then Sarah and I would review that through the planning process and apply applicable standards. For the existing private roads that are out there today, we have zero involvement with it. If the private development wants to ask for advice, we would apply the road standards and say, this is what is normally done out there. Your standard out there from a liability point of view, stop signs. So stop signs, they're nationwide. No matter where in the country you go, a stop sign looks like a stop sign looks like a stop sign. it doesn't have to be that way. The local development could do whatever stop signs they want. And you've seen these out there where they take a small wooden sign and they'll come something that really looks more aesthetically pleasing for their development. And they have the right to do that because it's purely within in that community, that private community. However, if an accident were to take place, then they would also be held liable for having an improper sign, stop sign out there. So those types of legality type of questions, we would certainly be a function as a consultant to that private entity. When you get into some of these other things, there's a line out there where we said, no, this is really something you need to talk to a consultant on, or these are some things you need to work with a contractor on. So there's a line out there, and it'll depend on what the question is. First and foremost, to answer Chris's question, oversight is limited only to public roads.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Don't go anywhere. We might have some more questions for you later.
Okay.
So we have quite the crew here tonight from the Tillamook People's Utility District. So with us, we have Doug Olson, who's board member, and Todd Simmons, who is the general manager. And also joining us this evening are Casey Fagan and Joanna Stelzig. So welcome, everyone. So Doug, Mr. Olson, would you care to kick off the conversation about PUD?
I will. Thank you, Sarah. And just call me Doug, not Mr. Olson. That's somebody else. Yes. First, I wanted to go back to what the sheriff said about the number of cops. It has nothing to do with PUD, but most people listening and watching will remember that just a few years ago, there was an election for an enhanced sheriff's patrol district. When Pacific City talked about incorporation, we had a big town hall meeting a few years ago, and there wasn't much appetite for that, but they said we would like more cops. And so several of us put together what we thought would be a workable enhanced sheriff's patrol district modeled after Washington County and a couple of other locations that included Pacific City and Nescalin. And a straw ballot said it was going to pass 2-1. Well, it failed about 2-1. So anyway, just point of history that the cops, there's been efforts to add more police down that way. And now there's also, as some of you know, there are 2 additional sworn officers in the budget that will be paid for through South County through the parking fees, principally at Cape Cowanda and elsewhere. So that's just start off by saying that. Now, over to PUD, which is the Tillamook People's Utility District. We're really lucky here because we're between 2 investor-owned utilities. For example, in Clatsop County, it's Pacific Power, and in Lincoln County, it's also Pacific Power. And they're a giant company, investor-owned, traded on the New York Stock Exchange, and so on, owned by Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett. And so our rates here are roughly 25 or 30% lower than our neighbors to the north and south. And also when you go east into Portland General Electric territory, we're also less than they are. So we have some of the least expensive electricity in Oregon. And further down the coast, there's Central Lincoln, PUD does the same thing. So anyway, we get our power, your power, the power you all pay for from the Bonneville Power Administration. And they have 31 dams on the Columbia and Snake River, and then some other generating facilities, including the nuclear plant in Hanford over in the Tri-Cities area. And by virtue of being a consumer-owned utility, we are able to get what's known as preference power. In other words, we can buy the cheap federal power ahead of any private utility like Portland General Electric. They can buy surplus power from Bonneville Power, but they pay a somewhat higher price. So we're really quite fortunate. So as to what's going on down in Nescalin, Nescalin and Pacific City, in fact, pretty much all of South County is served by what's known as a radial system, meaning the electricity comes overland on wires from the system of dams, and then it passes through the Portland area. and comes down Highway 6 and some other locations as well. And it gets into a Tillamook substation. It comes in as a high voltage, sometimes at 115,000, sometimes 230, and even higher than that. And then it's reduced to what is known as distribution voltage, which is about 25,000 volts. And from there, it comes down the Oregon coast, and it makes a stop in Beaver. There's a substation by the school. There's another one in Hebo, just up the road by what used to be the old Cedar Creek Child Care Center. And then it comes down to Nestucca substation, which is right across from the Hudson House Bed and Breakfast. And then it goes down and is fed into Nescalin. And so you have the same, we all have the same source of electricity in South County. The problem with the radial system is if it goes down, and it does go down, everybody goes down. And if there had to be some service on it in order to provide a safe environment for the service people, you shut off the power, at least in the area where they're working, which means everybody downstream has no electricity. So the plan, the long-term plan of PUD is to extend the line a little bit further south over the hill down into the Otis area and tie into Pacific Power, or possibly even Bonneville Power down in that same area. And that will require some additional rights of way to be acquired. It will require land for a subdivision, which PUD already owns, which is just off Ocean Way and Highway 101. And it's probably a 3 to 5, maybe even more years out, depending on how long it takes to acquire the right of way. The advantage to that is when we have one of our normal winter storms and a tree goes through the power, it will automatically switch to another source. So you'll be out of power for maybe as long as 10 seconds. And if it's built properly to current standards, then what's known as a recloser will pick it up from another direction. And that's a pretty major improvement, both from a safety standpoint and a reliability standpoint. And that's part of our master plan. We're currently funding all these activities at 2% money through the Rural Utility Service, which is part of the Department of Agriculture. And so it's about as cheap money as I think any of us have seen ever. So there's good things ahead for public power. And we all recognize that it is an absolute necessity that nobody does without electricity for very long these days. You just don't. And the final thing I'll say, and then certainly take some questions. And if I can't answer them, we have all those people you mentioned, including our chief engineer and general manager, if you want to get technical. Tillamook Lightwave, I want to talk about that just for a moment. Tillamook Lightwave is an ORS 190 organization that is owned by Tillamook County, the Port of Tillamook Bay, and Tillamook PUD. I also serve on that board, and we had a 3-hour meeting today. And what Tillamook Lightwave does is provide the backbone of high-speed broadband internet service throughout Tillamook County. And right now, it runs the length of the county. And you've seen work alongside the road where they're putting underground cable and all of that sort of thing. And it's primarily fiber that they're putting in. And they deal with well, Tillamook, let me go back. Tillamook Lightwave owns the cable landing station in Pacific City, which accommodates Microsoft, the University of Washington, and Hawaii. So, and then just north is Facebook, which is a bit of a separate operation. And I know Sarah's very happy to deal with those folks from time to time. But any event, we have in Tillamook County more offshore fiber coming in than any other location on the west coast of America. And it comes right here in Tillamook County. And we literally have a connection from New Zealand clear up into Asia, and literally half the world's fiber passes through Tillamook County. And yet we don't have very good broadband in a lot of places. People are still using 1990s dial-up and all of that. So where Lightwave is headed is we're having discussions about what would be our role, and should we be able to enhance the backbone and take fiber to the homes, or leave that to the private sector, or a combination, and all the various issues that we've been talking about. And I can't tell you exactly where that will end up, but the people who are working on it, which is the three of us on the board and staff and consultants, would all tell you that fiber optic today is much like rural electrification was years and years ago. It's finally getting out to the hinterlands where people need it. And these days, if you have a kid in school, you'll need high-speed internet. If you want to talk to your doctor or medical professional, you'll need high-speed internet. If you'd want to do something more than just communicate or watch movies on YouTube, you'll need it as well. It's basically essential. And so Nescalin is on the radar to have more, faster, and better. And I might add that very recently, Representative Gomberg, who represents Nescalin in Pacific City and South Tillamook County, asked for some recommendations on what to do with all the federal money that's pouring into the state of Oregon. And so he asked me to put together a group, and I did, and we came up with a number of suggestions. And the number one was $2.6 million to enhance broadband in South Tillamook County. And he turned that in. And I think a day or two ago, he promptly got slapped down to the ground and said, everybody, you get $2 million, the senators get $4 million, much like the old earmarks, and you can do whatever you want. So don't give up hope. There's other sources of funding. There are things that are on the horizon, but good things will happen with broadband. So with that, let me stop and see if there are any questions. And if they're highly technical, as I said, we've got an engineer online. And if it's political or economic, I can probably answer it, or our general manager can. So thank you for the opportunity to talk. And by the way, my wife and I go down and walk around Nescalin about twice a week. It's a wonderful community to go down and look at all the houses. You know, in Nescalin, there's not a single house that's like any other. It's the polar opposite of a planned unit subdivision.
So Doug, there is a question. And it is, what is PUD doing on fire prevention where they have lines in forested areas?
We have a very aggressive vegetation management program that's in compliance with state rules, and it's being revised. We just had a work session on that. And let me ask our general manager, Todd Simmons, if you take just a minute or so and talk about vegetation management, because that is a big deal. And we all remember that just a year ago, less than a year ago, there was a horrible fire in the Otis area up the Salmon River Canyon. So we're not immune. Todd, are you there? Could I speak to that?
Yeah, I'm here. And we spend a lot of money and go through our entire system every 4 years. We have a combination of mowing, trimming, and removal. And we even still do a little bit of spraying in some of our transmission corridors. And so we do quite a bit in managing the vegetation around our lines. We've got 2 mowers that work full time, and then 2 tree trimming crews that work full time. And then occasionally we contract out and bring in a helicopter to do some trimming as well. So pretty extensive from a vegetation management perspective. We're also in the process of updating our wildfire management plan. And that's getting close. It's going to be in front of the board at the June board meeting for their approval. So some of the things that we're talking about in the new plan are perhaps you've heard of public safety power shutoffs that have been happening all over California. And the PUC in Oregon is interested to make sure that all of us address PSPSs, is what they're called, and to make sure that we have communication plans if we ever get to that point. Now, usually what we'll do when we run into situations like we did this last September is we'll set our system up so that if we do see a fault on our system, like a tree or a branch in the line, that it just shuts off, that we leave it on until that time. Because we certainly don't want to get into a situation where we're compromising firefighters or others that are part of the response when you've got an event like that. But as we learned today in a big conference, Bonneville Power Administration has incorporated some of their public safety power shutoff protocols, and we'll be looking to do some of that should the conditions get to the place where there's immediate danger from leaving the power on. So that'll be incorporated into our new plan. It's not something that we that we plan on doing frequently, but it could be something that comes up in the future. But a lot of work is happening. These plans are being developed all over the state. The investor-owned utilities are required to have these plans in place for the PUC, and they get reviewed by the PUC. All of the public utilities just have to have them approved with their own local control, and certainly with the PUD, it's our elected board.
Thank you, Todd. And any other questions, Sarah, anything we can answer? And we'll all be around clear through the conclusion, so you can hold questions or do whatever you like.
Doug, I would like to ask one quickly, just to especially tie this back to the land use and planning discussion that we're having this evening. And we've talked about projections, population projections, making sure that there's adequate facilities and services available to meet those population needs as our communities continue to grow. PUD plays a very important role in the work that we do, especially when we're looking at development on vacant lands. And so I don't know who would be best to answer this question, but quickly, could you explain in just a few sentences? I mean, PUD does a lot of work working with developers to make sure that they are installing the appropriate infrastructure, that they've got adequate utility easements and various things to make sure as development comes in, one, their utility infrastructure is appropriate for the level of development, but two, it doesn't compromise existing services in the area, right? And so I don't know, could you speak to that just a little bit to give them kind of a peek of what happens on that side?
Yeah, I can speak to that just a little bit. Certainly, you know, we're following all the land use restrictions that are in place, and we're making sure that everything that gets installed is inspected and up to code, and we're constantly making sure that that's happening, and we're constantly making sure that we're living up to the codes that are required for the county and the state. But I will tell you that we've just been overwhelmed in the last year with the amount of service extensions that we've been asked to do throughout the county. And of course, you've all seen the development and how it's happening, but we're you know, currently on a pace for the last maybe 8 or 10 or maybe even 12 months of doing about $100,000 worth of work a month just in line extensions. And so pretty significant for us, and, you know, easily 2 or 3 times what we normally do.
One more thing, let me add to that. Long term, when you look at the industry, all of you are aware that a number of generating plants have come offline, meaning the coal plants that were operated by Portland General Electric and Boardman, and then up in Centralia. Several have come off in Montana. So even though we have wind and solar coming on, substantial amounts of wind actually, there still could be what's known as a capacity shortage down the road, because they're intermittent, and electricity has 2 ways they look at what's happening. They have a base load, which is pretty well constant across, and then there's peak loads in the summer and winter and all of that. And it's quite an art to keep that balanced across the system. And so, and Tillamook doesn't really do anything. About 99% of our energy comes from BPA, 1% comes from a methane digester in Tillamook, which is serviced by 5 farms. But if you look down the road, a lot of things are changing in this business, because there's so much going offline, and the intermittent replacement is questionable. And so, you know, there's a fair chance there'll be some brownouts in the future, but you know, who knows?
So yeah, and I'll just touch on that for a minute. You know, coal is as terrible as it's been for our environment. It was real consistent, just like hydroelectricity, right? Real dispatchable. If you need a little bit more, you get a little bit more right away, etc. Where solar and wind don't have that. We don't have that luxury with those. And so that's what makes it more difficult. Just as an example, our winter peak in Tillamook County is about 120 megawatts. And then, we can drift down to just using 20 megawatts. So 100 megawatt difference, during the summertime. So some of those big fluctuations need to be met with dispatchable power. And certainly you're not going to get any solar when the sun goes down, or when it's quite diminished when the clouds go over. And wind, which in some places are pretty consistent. We always get that couple of weeks every winter when it's really cold and there isn't any wind. And so you've got to have other power that's available to back that up.
Thank you, Todd and Doug. So I'm going to roll the last two questions together before we move on to the Nescalin Sanitary District. So are there any interest in smaller solar setups in areas like Blaine or Slab Creek? Or is there support or encouragement just overall for private homeowners to install solar or wind energy conversion devices?
So solar works, and there are some, but I would say it's minimal on the Oregon coast because of the cloud cover that we have more than, say, Central Oregon, or certainly down in parts of California. And wind can work as well. If someone does that, then you have to have the proper equipment so that in some cases, if you backfeed into the system, we have to know about that so that somebody doesn't accidentally get an electric shock of some sort. There's more to it than just putting up a windmill and attaching it to your meter. That's what I'm saying.
And we certainly support that. We've got a group that here at the PUD that can help folks that would like to, where that might be pretty attractive in some parts of the country, especially if you're using solar or wind instead of a coal plant or an oil plant, et cetera. But of course, in the Northwest, all you're doing is replacing other carbon-free power, right? Because of all the hydro that's carbon-free. So as far as the trade-off, you're not getting as big a bang that you would in some other parts of the country.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I think
I'll just say quickly, pop on our website and you can access all of us here at the PUD at any time. Thanks.
Thank you, Todd. Last but certainly not least, from the Nescalin Sanitary Authority, we have Derek Shippey, who's operations manager, and then Susan Amor, who is a board member. So welcome and thank you. We're very excited to learn more about sewer services in Nescalin.
All right, well, I'll start out with, I'm Derek Shippey, and our current service area is from Scherzinger Road, south down to the South Beach Road. And currently we only have collection systems in the core area of Nescalin, South Beach, and the Hawk Creek Hills area. And we have 5 pump stations that service the core and the South Beach area, and 2 primary stations that relay all the flow to our treatment plant. And then the Hawk Creek Hills area is on its own separate pressure system that goes over the hill and directly down to the treatment plant. So it bypasses all the main pump stations. And currently our treatment plant is rated at 110,000 gallons per day, dry weather flow, 275,000 gallons a day if it's a wet weather event. And as far as treatment, we have 2 sequencing batch reactors. And from there we have ultraviolet disinfection. And during the winter months, our treated effluent goes to an outfall in Nescalin Creek. And that period would be from October through May, when we're allowed to discharge into the creek. And then the rest of the time it goes into a facility you've probably seen kind of by the base of Cascade Head. It's a 5-acre holding pond, and everything goes into there during the summertime. And then it gets discharged back into the creek during the wintertime and mixed with our plant flow. So, and as far as capacity goes, we are currently at 594 residential equivalent units, and we have 10 more underway in the works. And we have a total number right now that the plant can handle 714. So we're still about 120, 100, it'll be 110 REUs away from that total number once the 10 underway get built out. So, and we do have in the works, well, in our capital improvement plan to upgrade the treatment plant in the future. And we're actually working right now on updating our capital improvement plan because our prior one was from 2005. So we actually just had one of our main pump stations, a preliminary design report done on that. And that pump station would feasibly service a trunk line going up 101 to the northern area of our service area. So we had to do a study to make sure that that pump station could handle flow if, say, that trunk line was extended up 101. And so it does have the ability to handle larger flows, and we will be putting in controls that can handle larger pumps, but the pumps we have now are more than adequate for what we have in the immediate vicinity. So we've been kind of waiting to have that work done before we start on our capital improvement plan because they kind of go hand in hand. So, and also in the near term for needs, we also are going to be replacing that liner out there in the lagoon as well. It's been in there since '94 and we've been doing some studies on it. And so we're gonna figure out how to get that replaced out there. So other than that, we've done a pretty good job. We've maintained all of our pump stations. We've pretty much knocked out almost everything on our capital improvement list that was done in 2005. So that's another reason why it's time to update it and kind of reprioritize things. So other than that, there's how many hookups do we forecast in the next 20 years? That's kind of hard to say. If you go off of the last 15 years since 2005 when it was done, we've had 75 REUs added since then. So say the next 20 years, we might have 100 more. It's just hard to say. It could be developer driven as well. So that's also the reason why a lot of people would ask why we haven't put a trunk line up 101 yet. And it's one of those, it's more developer driven because right now, if we were to use the current ratepayers' money to put a line up 101, we'd have to raise everybody's rates substantially in order to fund something like that. And then how many people are going to be hooking up to it? So unless there is a substantial development, it just doesn't make sense to run a line up 101 at this time.
Thank you, Troy. And the developer, I mean, typically the developer is the one who's responsible for paying for the installation of those improvements, correct?
Correct. And they can set up, I believe it's called a reimbursement district. And then other people that do hook into that line, they get a portion of the system development money kicked back to them. So it's not like they don't get anything out of installing their line down 101.
Thank you. So, and maybe Susan, this would be definitely something for you too, a question for you too as a member of the board. So Chris made a comment, forecasts may need to be adjusted upward due to the recent pandemic. I mean, you know, I don't have my screensaver up because it won't work, but I mean, you know, Todd from PUD had mentioned how busy he is. And I know Chris and I are both also experiencing the strong development pressures and acceleration right now. So, I mean, the board working with the district, do you have any plans to adjust your forecast based on, you know, the pandemic or just even because of the market that we're experiencing?
I guess I could, can you hear me? Okay. I guess I would say that, you know, I kind of go by, you know, what Derek said is, you know, we have a certain capacity and you know, the one I was really prepared with my numbers on the last one we did. But I don't, you know, what I didn't do is add up all of the vacant lots were within that district. And I think we're well under that 120, even with, you know, potential new development that might, you know, developable land that might be coming up. But I think that, and you know, some of the areas, you know, are not in the district that might be right next to a neighborhood that is in the district. Viking Estates is certainly one that, you know, they do the Advantage systems, but it would have been a lot of money for us to go all the way up to that neighborhood, and those lots are big enough that, and the Advantage system, you know, really is much better. It's almost as much as it would be if you were to hook up to sewer by the time you get done with it. But it's a very sophisticated system. And for the first 3 homes that were built up there, they seem to be working pretty well. And even a few people down on Hawk have put Advantage systems in because we're not able to put our line down Hawk all the way. So, you know, there is some good alternatives, but I think the sewer district over the many years, I think I was, I'm account number 1. I bought this lot and we were able to hook up to sewer. So it's near and dear to my heart, and I'm proud to be on their board.
Thank you, Susan. So Kevin asked, is it feasible for a development like Viking Estates to have a shared system? So from a land use, so I'll take a stab at this first. From a land use planning perspective, yes, because Nescalin is a community that is an urban community per Goal 14. And so because of that status, that shared system opportunity exists. If Viking Estates was somewhere like Slab Creek Road, because that's outside of the unincorporated community boundary, the question or the answer from the land use perspective would be no. But what does the district have to say?
I don't necessarily, I don't know. Derek may have something to weigh in on that. I mean, I think at one point we looked at what it would cost to go up that far, and we're going past a lot of neighborhoods that aren't even hooked up, you know. And Pacific Overlook or Hills of Nescalin is a perfect example that they had really big lots. They had to replace their original septics and with more expensive systems. And so they, you know, there was I think that was the one that there was a vote that, you know, it was okay for them to get out of the district. And because the chances of us going all the way up there, so it was really Hills of Nescalin and then Viking Estates that were only ones. And it was only fair that those neighborhoods have been paying into the district these years, you know, a small amount of money, but on their taxes. And so it was appropriate that, you know, if we weren't going to go up there, that they should be let out of the district.
Thank you.
Got it.
And also the Crest area also opted to get annexed out of the district as well. So all of those high density areas there, which would have possibly covered a cost of running the lineup 101, opted to annex out of the district. So now it definitely doesn't make sense for us to run a line up there. As I said before, the cost to the customers, we just have to raise the rate significantly. So basically that's why we've kind of left that as a developer driven item. If somebody wants to develop something and then set up a reimbursement district and get money back out of the line, then that's the way it would have to proceed. Either that or we'd have to really raise the rates on the current users, and that wouldn't really be that fair.
Yeah, he's right.
Thank you. Wow, that's all very interesting information to share. Does anybody else have any questions for Derek or Susan? Or we are at 7:30. Brenda, I know you are excellent at keeping time for our town halls. So are there any final burning questions that anybody has for any of our district and service providers? Okay, Well, to all of the panelists, thank you all so much for all you do to help us through planning and development to make sure that our commitment to public health, welfare, and safety continues to be met.
Yeah, I ditto that. And Sarah, as always, you're invaluable for these sessions. Thanks again to all the panelists for their contributions to our small little community.
Yes, thank you very much.
Brenda.
All right. Good night, everyone.
All right. Thank you all.